Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Aware Muslim Present. The topic for this episode is obviously the recent elections in the United States where America decided to vote in Donald Trump. And as in terms of his numbers, he won 290 electoral votes compared to Hillary Clinton's 228. However, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote. Right after he got elected, the chaos already has started within the U.S. We had riots and protests throughout at least 10 cities in the U.S. where, for example, Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, where you had about 2,000 people showing up in Seattle, 4,000 in Oregon. And also, on the other side, we also had actual rise in acts of racial hatred. So, for example, swastikas were painted in Philly and in New York, as well as you had attacks on Muslim sisters, with the hijab. There's a hate crime being investigated in one city where a Saudi student was killed in Wisconsin. And
that was by strangers, right? It wasn't like someone who knew him or anything like that?
That's correct. That's what they're investigating right now, according to the article on USA Today that I read, is that it's not known. They're looking at it as if it's a hate crime, but it was unknown as to who killed him. There's no girlfriend or something like that. It's or a friend that's suspected.
Sure.
In that, and also I don't know if you heard, but the KKK is looking at celebrating the victory in North Carolina.
That's oddly appropriate,
right?
Given everything.
So I think that for me personally, what happened was on election night, I didn't actually stay up and get to watch the polls. I didn't think it was worth my time to do that.
So you're the one person who actually fell asleep on election night. That was you. Huh?
That's correct.
Okay.
So
okay.
But I did wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and I was telling myself, no, I'm not going to look at the phone to see who won. But I did, and then I couldn't sleep after that.
You broke down, man.
Yeah, I broke down. I couldn't sleep after that. And I think this is an anxiety that a lot of us as Muslims that we are feeling with the election of this man who, as we talked in our last episode, who kind of singled out Muslims and with the Muslim ban, and it is something that obviously that we can't ignore as Muslims. Like sometimes we can ignore what's going on with some kind of deep political things, but this is something obviously we can't ignore.
No.
I think, though, that where we need to start is to kind of step back and kind of put our emotions aside for a second and take a sober look at the reality of electoral politics in the United States. And I think where we need to start is the Princeton study that was done in 2014. And what they studied was 1,779 policies that were passed in the U.S. between 1981 to 2002.
Okay.
And so this is these are professors. They're looking at these policies to see how these policies, do they favor the masses or do they favor the elites? And what they found is that the elites, if they don't want something to pass, they get their way 82% of the time. If they want something to pass, they get their way 45% of the time. And when you look at everyone else, the 99%, they basically have no influence on policies at all.
So those percentages don't even apply to 99% of the population, because it just doesn't matter which way they...
Exactly.
What their desires are, what their vote is. And I guess that's related to what we were talking about last time as well, right? That, just as a Muslim and just as a decent human being, when you see someone who's as hateful, as openly hateful, because Hillary Clinton's policies have had the same impact Donald Trump's words do. Worse, if you actually look at her record. But as openly hateful and as openly ignorant and as openly willingly just this arrogant person, this arrogant human being that you can't really be held as respectable by any standards.
Right.
Even if you're an American, even if you're someone who really believes in the idea of America, and loves the military and loves all that. Here's a man who called John McCain not a hero because he had the weakness of getting captured.
Right.
John McCain being a man who was tortured and withstood, to his values I happen to disagree with, but withstood to his values under torture.
Right.
While, Donald Trump was making money, I guess. I mean, I assume. Either squandering or somewhat, improving his father's investments in him. I mean, it's not nearly the same thing. And so, I mean, even if you believe in that, it's crazy. I mean, he's that fundamentally unfit in any way. But at the same time, like you feel that. But I'm gonna actually make the argument that, I mean, for Muslims, this really shouldn't be something that they see as like horrifying necessarily, right? What it should be is they see it as energizing. That was my response. I saw it and I was like, okay, now we're on, right? And the reason for that was because, we've had it for so long where, the system will pretend to be something it's not. We were talking about this last time as well.
Right.
You mentioned all the times the system has pretended to be something and actually been doing something very different. And it's the case right now.
Yeah.
And so you had Hillary Clinton, who was pretending to be inclusive, who was pretending to not be a racist, who was pretending to, be for the poor, to believe in an America where everyone's contributions count, where Mexicans are important. Hey, Barack Obama deported more Mexicans than George Bush did.
Right. Exactly.
Hillary Clinton voted for the, didn't vote for the crime bill, but, supported the crime bill when her husband was drafting it.
Right.
In the 90s that, not introduced, but hugely amplified mass incarceration, and with the mandatory minimums and all of that, that is now the reality of so many black people in America, where they are specifically and unjustly targeted by the police, for crimes that everyone commits,
right.
including
And
black
that's
people.
and that's the thing, is that just for what mass incarceration is the idea that that the U.S. justice system targets black people more than white people, and one of the kind of the policies that have enabled that is what they call apartheid sentencing, which is that, for example, when someone is arrested for crack cocaine, 5 grams of crack cocaine, they get the same sentence as half a kilo of cocaine, which is, cocaine is used by rich white people, and crack cocaine is used by poor people, which are usually people of color. So that's what mass incarceration is.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, and she's so in line with all of that. And so now for the first time, the people of America have to directly look in the mirror and see what their system actually is. I mean, sure, Donald Trump, supported the Central Park Five, innocent black men who are kids, 14-year-olds, that were forced into false confessions and they're thrown in prison at the time, and Trump, not knowing anything about the case at the time, asked for them to be hung.
Right.
He asked for the death penalty to be applied to them in New York. And then years after, when they were finally released and, started suing the government and, for wrongful convictions, he said they should stay in prison. Not even like, he said, the cops at the time must have known something we don't. And like, they were exonerated by DNA. They were exonerated by the real, criminal who actually assaulted a woman in Central Park. I mean, that's where the story starts. He confessed, and that wasn't enough for Donald Trump because he wanted to keep these guys in prison. And recently, just in his last few weeks, in the last few weeks of his campaign, he said they should remain in prison. This isn't even something old. He said this recently. He made another statement to the New York Times, or I forget which newspaper. Probably not the New York Times now that I think about it. But the point is that, like, yes, Trump does this openly, but this is what the system is anyway. Trump is just blatant about it.
Right.
Trump just doesn't care about the poor, but the system doesn't care about the poor either. It just pretends to. Trump isn't interested in, trying to build better relationships with the Mexican communities. But it was Hillary Clinton and Obama's regime that was deporting Mexicans to begin with. So, I mean, really, how much do they really care, right? And so from that perspective, it's good. It's good. It should be a call to action for people to realize this is what we've been up against all along.
Yeah.
And Muslims should be at the forefront of making people understand that this is what the system has always been. And it's the same for Muslims, but Hillary Clinton can pretend to be the more pro-Muslim candidate. She can throw in, Khidr Khan and his family, and and ride off their Muslimness to make herself seem more inclusive. But as we said last time very clearly, the only person right now that has Muslim blood on her hands is Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And she's got a lot of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So the idea that Donald Trump is Donald Trump will openly talk about, putting bullets in pigs' blood and killing Muslims with it. Donald Trump will openly talk about, banning Muslims and not letting them come into the country, protecting the LGBT community in, America from a hateful foreign ideology. We all know what he means. He can openly talk about that stuff. Hillary Clinton is acting on it, though. She's acting on that hatred and has been acting on it by endorsing the war on terror for a huge portion of her political career.
And I think that creating that sort of surface versus reality is we should remember that's a specific strategy that has certain kind of merits and has certain kind of benefits. And in the early days of when Trump first announced his Muslim ban, the people that reined him in or were railing against him were not just the Democrats, but also the Republican establishment. So, for example, Mark Rubio, even Governor Christie, both of them went after Trump for that. And you know what? You know which other Republican went after him?
Who?
Cheney. Cheney, he actually said that this goes against everything we stand for and believe in. Cheney.
I don't know what completely goes against everything Dick Cheney stands for and believes in. I find that very interesting.
Yeah. So when we look at the Muslim ban and we see the Republican establishment go against it, we have to ask ourselves, well, why are they against it, right? Why are they so horrified at Donald Trump, announcing these things? And we talked about last time, we talked about the whole concept of dog whistle politics, the idea that you go after that the Republican Party has been doing the Southern strategy for decades, where they go after racists, court racists. So you have to ask yourself, well, why are they so horrified? Why is everyone so horrified with this language? And the thing, it has a certain utility. It has a certain benefit to doing that. And I think that ironically, the best person who kind of really explained why was actually O'Reilly. O'Reilly, when he was going after Trump, he says, look, we basically need the Muslim Arab rulers to go after jihad, and what he means by that is really Muslims, right? What they're talking about here is basically what Malcolm X, Michael Shabazz, may Allah have mercy on his soul. What he said was that that in his famous story about the house Negro, right? Yeah. That he's with the master, and when he's with the master, says, "We are sick," right? Yeah. That's really when you really kind of get past the niceties, what it's really about is the ugly world of neocolonialism, where it goes to what you're saying, is that this is what America and the world really has to face, is what is really going on. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That colonial world pre-World War II didn't just kind of go up in thin air. Right.
So what you're saying is that the horror that Republicans even felt at the mention of the Muslim ban, Paul Ryan was against it, all these people were against it, is because they need house Muslims to help them wage their colonial project in the Muslim world.
Absolutely.
And that's why they were so not okay. Because I was always curious about that. It always kind of interested me that why is it that they're drawing this line where, after everything they've done, after countries they've devastated through their ideology, they're saying, oh, but a ban on Muslims, that's terrible. Right. We can bomb their countries, destroy their way of life, it completely annihilate them and destroy everything that they hold dear. But banning them from coming to the U.S., that's a step too far.
Right.
And now I'm realizing, well, no, it's because they need to maintain some level of a relationship with those Muslims that are, for whatever reason, willing to work with them in helping them. Because you're right, when Bill O'Reilly talks about jihad, or when any of these people talk about jihad, they're not talking about a particular action or a particular view that they're opposing. They're talking about anybody that opposes U.S. regional interests in the Muslim world.
And because remember, jihad was fine with them when it was done by CIA in terms of to take out the Russians.
Absolutely.
Through the ISI in Pakistan and
the jihad in Afghanistan.
Yeah, jihad in Afghanistan. So jihad is fine as long as it's a tool used in that. So they're not really talking about that.
They're talking about their own interests in the region.
Yeah, right. They're talking about that element of the Muslim ummah that is waking up, that is not subservient. They're the field Negro that's trying to you
Yeah.
know, to continue, you know,
Continue fighting. Continue resisting.
yeah, continue fighting, and to continue Malcolm X's sort of his what he said. There's the house Negro and there's the field Negro. The field Negro is trying to escape, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
So that's when they go after that, they label those type of people all
Yeah.
types of labels, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the point is, that you need the house Negro to rein in the field Negro, which is
Yeah.
the house
Yeah.
Muslim railing in
Really.
the field Muslim that wants to
Yeah.
you know be independent regardless. And that's the thing. That's the key thing, is that it's not about the violence about that person. It's
Yeah.
the person's views, right?
Yeah.
Because as you said, what are they interviewing the person when they come in, right? They're interviewing about their views, right?
Yeah. It's they're searching for thought crimes, basically, is what they're doing when this person comes in. Yeah,
Right.
Absolutely.